We have an anonymous question here. This one is from Pennsylvania.
Hey guys, I'm staying anonymous for this question, but I am from Pennsylvania and I am a Patreon subscriber. My question is about long-term relationships that started when you were a teenager or young adult. My partner and I have been together for 7 years. We met when we were 17. We moved in together at 19, and we've been living together ever since. I do feel as though we have difficulty understanding each other, and we're almost at a constant state of conflict. We disagree on major topics, minor topics. No matter what it is, we're finding it difficult to find a middle ground with each other. And we often avoid having the difficult conversations just so we save ourselves an argument. When I took some time to think about it, I realized that we've both changed tremendously since we were teenagers, and I wonder if we've just grown in different directions. I feel as though I'm the one who puts in more work when it comes to self-healing, growth, self-care, things like that. And now that I'm an adult, I have a better understanding of my needs and values, and I just don't have the patience that I used to for conflict and mistakes that my partner makes. So I'm looking forward to hearing what your thoughts are on healing these types of relationships.
Dr. LaPera, I'd love to talk to you about conflict. It seems to me that conflict is the manifestation of the ego and its insecurities. And so anytime I engage or anytime I amplify a conflict, it's out of my own self-righteousness. At least every example I can think of right now, it's me needing to be right, which is really showing my ego and the insecurities that I'm feeling around the situation. Because the truth is that if a random crazy person comes up onto the street and tells me that the Chicago Bulls are the greatest basketball team of all time, I don't care about that, right? But if TK is on here and he's like, Chicago Bulls, I'm like, wait, let me talk to you about why that's not true, right? I need to be right here. Can you talk to me a bit about conflict?
Yeah, and I love this kind of astute observation in terms of the ego and its connection. Conflict, typically is, or what conflict activates, right? Disagreement, these moments of differing perspectives where we feel threatened. Conflict activates our threat response, of course, governed and driven ultimately by our nervous system. And when our ego, right, this whole created narrative, and even this beautifully goes full circle, right? All of these beliefs, this identity, who I know myself to be, my certainty and predictability around myself in this way, I become affirmed, right? I become sure, certain, more certain as years go by in terms of who I am, what I am, and how I'm to show up in the world. And so in those moments where we are met with possible disagreement or a threatened nature, or someone is kind of pulling up a mirror to us in a way or threatening some aspect of our assumed identity, then we do feel threatened. And we do then react in defense of our ego or of this ultimately assumed identity. And so when I'm hearing about conflict in relationships, especially in long-term tenured relationships, I think two things. Generally about conflict, I think conflict is really natural. And so few adults are equipped on how to navigate moments of conflict, of disagreement, of how to kind of pull back from our reaction and say, oh yes, I am feeling threatened in this moment, right? I can kind of regulate my threat response and still hold space and hear your perspective, hear your wants, hear your needs, and negotiate for, our shared best interest. Very few of us have those tools. We haven't been modeled. Maybe some of us have lived experience of explosive conflict, where conflict was threatening in and of itself. Or maybe we had an experience where there was never conflict. Things were swept under the rug, similar to, it sounds like, the environment that's now evolved in this relationship, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, we can't talk about anything, so we'll just avoid talking about anything that could possibly, right, cause conflict. So I think generally conflict is something that is, again, misunderstood. Conflict is natural. It's not that conflict can be avoided. Do we have the tools to navigate conflict in a responsive way? And I'm having another kind of reaction to this idea of changing in a relationship and long-term relationships. And right, are we just different people now? Because I do think we have this expectation that whatever the relationship looked like at the start, whether it was in our teenage years or in our later years, we kind of don't hold space for the natural evolution of not only individual humans, of a relationship in and of itself. This is another moment where we put an expectation that the person always be how they once were, and that the relationship always feel as it once did. And the moment it doesn't, we do start to consider, well, maybe this means that we grew apart. Maybe this means this relationship isn't for us, right? Or maybe it means that we've evolved as people and that naturally the relationship itself will then change. So then maybe it means that we need to learn how to navigate and learn how to talk about these difficult topics and explore each other's perspective so that we can rediscover each other and then determine what our future can look like together. I don't think it's just an immediate go-to of this means it's wrong, but I do think that comes from this expectation. I do think a lot of us, some of us are years into, decades into a relationship, and we imagine it should always be as it once was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that we met someone and they are now solidified, and I will carry that person and that personality forward in perpetuity. And if they ever change, it actually says something that is wrong with them. And especially if that change does not conform to my idea of the way this person should be. That's the expectation that you're talking about. But you're also bringing up something that I didn't realize before. Avoidance is another type of conflict. It's an internal conflict. And now I'm afraid to bring something up because I'm afraid of the argument, or I'm afraid of what they might think about me. So can we touch more on avoidance?
Yeah, avoidance, I think, is a very common adaptation. We've learned to avoid in absence of having the tools to navigate these upsetting, dysregulating, often moments of disconnection. And, again, avoidance itself becomes the learned protection. And some of us, our entire climate in our childhood, I should say, is that of avoidance, right? Where all emotions were swept under the rug, this idea too, I think sometimes very well-intentioned parents have this idea that you need to avoid certain circumstances or emotional displays in front of children, right? We kind of hide certain aspects from our kids, creating, again, this culture of avoidance where kids don't see difficult exchanges happening, don't see conflict being resolved in a responsive, mature manner. So all they do learn then, because again, avoidance is a byproduct of feeling overwhelmed or feeling threatened. So when we don't have the resources to deal with it, it is a very savvy adaptation actually to say, oh, okay, well, I won't put myself in a situation to have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then so we continue, and this is, I think, where we exhaust ourselves kind of creating or controlling the environment around us, endlessly trying to avoid the discomfort. And we cause a lot of added conflict in our relationships. So when I talk about, and I break down different nervous system responses in the book, avoidance or flight, this is kind of scientifically what it would map onto in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn kind of nervous system model. And I translate each of those different responses into relational behaviors. Because the avoidant behavior or avoidant behaviors out of protection cause a lot of conflict in relationships. Because if you are in a partnership, if you are the avoidant who doesn't have the tools to talk about difficult conversations, that for a lot of people can be perceived as, well, my partner doesn't care. They never want to have a difficult conversation, or they're always distracted when I'm trying to bring up something important to them. This is important to me. They must not care about me because I can't seem to hold their attention, even if I'm directly telling them, we need to talk about this. And in reality, it's not that they don't care at all. They are feeling so threatened and insecure that their avoidance is a byproduct of their inability to show up for that conversation, not necessarily a lack of care at all. And I break down the other responses as well, with kind of the fight response looking like those eruptive moments where we are discharging, like we talked about earlier, right, Joshua, all this energy out, saying and doing things we don't mean, maybe even shamefully feeling like a mean, terrible person. And again, this isn't condoning the behavior at all, but this is just giving a level of understanding, oh, maybe I'm erupting on people near constantly, even sometimes, because maybe I feel so unsafe that fighting is the only way that my system has learned to create that safety. But avoidance, I think, is a big one, again, because very few of us have learned the tools to be present and responsive in these emotional moments. So what we've learned to do instead is avoid them.
Right. And avoidance sometimes makes sense. I'm thinking yesterday, I was walking down the street and a police officer had pulled over someone and it was escalating really quickly and he got his gun out. And I know at first it's like, I'm going to see. No, I'm not going to see at all. I turned around. I go down a different street because anything can happen here. I want to avoid that because why? I feel threatened, as you just talk about. Well, I guess there's some scenario where I could feel like fighting there. I'm in my 40s now, so there's no desire for that. But talk to me about the other responses here. So you've got the freeze, because you don't just embody one of these. It's not like, maybe you have a default. And I suspect a lot of conflicts in a relationship is because two people are on that fight wavelength and then it just amplifies the fighting. Or the internal conflict, if both people are avoidant, then all of a sudden now you're experiencing more conflict, even if it's not directly with the other person, it's directly within yourself. But then there's the freeze component and the fawn component as well. The fawn can be what? People pleasing, I assume?
People pleasing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm going to fix this by making you feel better?
I'm going to anticipate and remove the problem or the threat before it's even a threat. Right? So I'm always endlessly, and we feel like we're on edge. We're endlessly kind of assessing other people, trying to, determine what their mood is. Are they possibly shifting in their mood so that we can avoid a reaction? Or maybe sometimes it's even internal. We're censoring our thoughts in the anticipation of possibly even upsetting them. And again, all of this came from a childhood in which that was protective. There was value gained. If you were able to be super sensitive maybe to a parent who was intermittently or erratically explosive, and if you were able to determine what things set them off and remove or not become that threat in that moment, pleasing them, then you would avoid being on the receiving end of it. And that's a very savvy one that I think can turn into almost a personality, characterological, kind of way of being, where I am always on edge, always tuning and tending to the world around me as a means of keeping myself safe.
And there's a really unhealthy way I've seen people deal with that when they recognize, I don't want to be a people pleaser. Then they stop doing things that are kind. They start being unkind because I don't want to be a people pleaser. And I was like, well, no, the antidote to fawning is not to start fighting, essentially.
Right. And I want to, and I do think that some of us overcompensate into the other direction, right? Now it's all about me, as opposed to kind of the middle, more flexible ground of different interests, best interests. We can kind of accommodate to the best of our ability everyone. And I think there's a natural exchange that happens in relationships. Sometimes it's about us, and sometimes we're in the giving end of support. I want to speak just really quickly because I think the freeze one is very important and very misunderstood and causes a lot of shame. So universally, we all go through a similar sequence in terms of our threat response. When we perceive a threat, first our body mobilizes action, with the best case scenario being one of two things. We fight it, we overcome the threat, no longer a problem, or we flee, we leave, no longer a problem. If that's not possible, and of course, if people pleasing, right, that hypervigilance, the threat's already here, so I can't avoid it. If that's not possible, then the final thing that I will do, or my nervous system will do, initiated outside of my awareness to protect myself or keep myself physiologically alive, is it will, quite like an animal, play dead. We will play dead. All of that mobilized energy will drain out of us, right? We won't have that tension in our muscles anymore. We'll feel even so weak, we possibly can't get up. We're so unmotivated. We don't have any energy to do anything. And I'm speaking to this one in particular because these are the moments that some of us might even have heard, well, why didn't you say or do anything if this, terribly abusive thing was or is happening to you? And these might even be the moments that we wonder, why didn't I say or do anything? What's wrong with me? Why didn't I protect myself in what was happening? And I think understanding the nervous system is a lot of us couldn't. We were in that shutdown state where the most protective thing for us to be is almost outside of our body in that way. We literally didn't have the energy anymore in our muscles to fight back, to defend ourselves. because that mobilized energy, that emotional energy, a lot of times of anger, like I said earlier, is incredibly important. It's not only an indicator that we're being violated or that our need is going unmet. That mobilized energy within the anger experience is what allows us to then assert, right? To go out and say, no, this has to stop. I need to advocate for myself and put up the boundary or meet my need in whatever way. And when we don't have that energy, we quite literally can't. Just like that animal, we are playing dead. And for a lot of us, not only in these acute moments where we couldn't protect ourselves, do we carry shame? Some of us begin to, especially if we live in this state chronically, we begin to worry that we're unmotivated, that we're a procrastinator, that we're not meant to do really anything important because we can't. And now we have all of these kind of identities around what began as a very adaptive, natural human stress response. So understanding, and I go into, again, all these different indicators, both in ourself, how do I know when I'm in one of these states of reactivity? And also, how might I know when my loved ones are in these states of reactivity? Because when we know, two things can happen. We can be more compassionate with ourselves and other people, right? Understanding through a new lens what their behavior is. And now we know that our nervous system's involved. We can create that space that I was talking about earlier for a new embodied choice. We can intentionally help our nervous system regulate itself in those moments so that we have access to a new way of thinking and to ultimately a new possibility.
I hope you enjoyed that highlight from the Minimalist Private Podcast. If you'd like another highlight, check out this video. If you'd like to watch the minimal episode, check out this video. Or if you'd like to dive deep into full episodes of the Minimalist Private Podcast, head on over to Patreon. The link is in the description. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free.